Is it well with your soul?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a Bible study this morning. We are continuing. 2 lessons left, actually, is all we're going to be dealing with this in these Wisdom Call series that we've been working through as we've been studying the Proverbs based on my schedule and some other things that we're going to have this lesson. And there's one more lesson. There are single lesson sheets back there, at least there were, back in the back for just today. I'll show you most of the material on the screen as well. And there's still some of the whole set, but the whole set really is kind of, most of it has already been done. That's sitting back there on the table. Again, there's only one lesson left after today in the series. But we've been working through this Proverbs, trying to gain some wisdom and understanding of the message of each of these Proverbs, and kind of taking one by one and just kind of examining them and learning the principles of wisdom that God provides for us in each of those moments. If you would, though, before we begin, let's bow our heads together and share in a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this day that you've blessed us with, the opportunity to worship you and to honor you today. We're so humbled by the wonderful privilege that it is to open your word, to appreciate your wisdom, to gain an understanding of your principles and the things that you would have us to know. Guide us in our study today. Help us to appreciate how important it is to encourage and sharpen one another as we walk our lives of faith, and edify and uplift others to do the same. Strengthen us in our study today. Thank you for Jesus, and it's through His name that we pray. Amen. So let's talk a little bit about this idea, as iron sharpens iron, out of Proverb 27 and verse 17. And the whole phrase actually that's given there in that text is this: iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. The truth of it, well, I always do that. I finally stopped myself. I always give you the answer to the first question before I let you see it. But again, these questions are in your lesson sheets as well. But so how would you define, before I define it, how would you define the meaning and function of this proverb? What's he driving at? Okay, a friend will challenge you to be the best you can be, and within that relationship. What else you might think of when you hear that phrase, iron sharpeneth iron? Okay, so make connections with others who are striving to honor God, right? Because if you'll do that, you can lift each other through that process and help one another through that process. Any other general thoughts that you might have thought of as it relates to that question? Yeah, we should be being an example to each other, right? And we ought to be able to look at one another and find that encouragement that should benefit all of us. Go ahead, Isaac.
Interpreted as an invitation. If you, like we said, if we're sharpening iron, we're getting stronger in faith and everything like that. But on the opposite side, if we're not doing anything, if we have one blade over here, one blade over here, not doing anything, they're going to get dull.
Yeah, and if we're not sharpening one another, then the opposite result happens, right? We don't make the improvements, we don't grow, we don't find the encouragement that we're looking for, and that's why this is important as well. Anything else you thought of generally? We'll get into the specific questions in a moment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more then about this. So what should the ultimate hope for our friends be out of 1 Timothy 4, verse 16? To be saved, right? And what a simplistic thought, right? But yet an important aspect of what we're talking about. Really, what I should want out of all the desires I may have, out of all the hopes for others I may have, should that not be the predominant one, right? For all the successes and benefits and things that people might be able to achieve in their lives, that we might cheer them on, rightfully so, in doing, what greater encouragement should we be offering to others than to appreciate the need for salvation and promise in Jehovah? Notice what the verse itself said. Take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and those who hear you or hear thee. Is it selfish to be interested in your own personal spiritual well-being and ultimate salvation? Not at all, right? I think that if I don't take some personal interest in my own salvation, I can't be what? I can't be effective in helping others. It's not a selfish pursuit to spend some time personally growing stronger in my faith and commitment and in the promises of salvation in Jesus Christ. That is not something that is selfish. In fact, I believe it to be something that is necessary if I'm ultimately then going to be able to encourage others to do the same. It's kind of hard to be an example of something that if you're not living it yourself. It's kind of hard to encourage and uplift and edify somebody else in something if they don't see that being exemplified in me. Even sometimes things in our lives maybe that we come across that maybe we don't necessarily have any interest in initially, but when we watch somebody else's passion about it, and we watch how somebody else responds and reacts to what it is they're interested in, it almost kind of sets a fire in us sometimes too, where maybe I wasn't even something I would consider or had looked at or thought about, and yet here's this opportunity to watch somebody else to have great energy and passion towards something, and the end result is now I'm interested. Now I have an opportunity to grow in that as well. Take heed unto yourself first, but do so that you can save yourself and them that respond and listen to the example that you have. Iron sharpens iron. Go ahead, Bob.
And it's not selfish what God tells you to do. It's obedience.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Bob. It isn't a selfish pursuit, right? It's a godly pursuit because we've been led to make sure that we're honoring His will and working out our own salvation with fear and trembling and taking on that personal obedience and responsibility. So, this is what Jeff wrote in the material that I thought was interesting. He said, "What does not happen overnight becomes true with perseverance, either in that which is good or that which is unfortunate. It is that metaphor that wisdom conjures up to illustrate the power that good friends have to challenge and perfect one another." The truth is, bad habits and good habits are formed over time, right? Habits are formed over time. And good and bad habits take that process of time to begin to develop. But the problem is with habits are, either good or bad, once they've been established over time, they're hard to what? They're hard to break. So if we've spent time in good behaviors and positive encouragements and things of faith and promise of God, then hopefully that's going to be hard to break me from, right? That's been my habit. That's been my behavioral choices. But if they're negative, if they're bad, then those are just as hard to break, right? Those patterns of behaviors are just as hard to break. So the more time I spend encouraging and uplifting and helping and aiding others through the process of time, we all get better. And that's the hope, right? That we would all get better in our relationship with the Father. So what impact then should we be having on our friends according to 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 11? Yeah, he said, "Wherefore comfort yourselves together and edify one another, even as also ye do." What does comfort imply, by the way? I'm not trying to challenge your intelligence here, but I'm just trying to get the thought process going. So what is comfort about? Providing comfort towards others. What is that about generally? Okay, sometimes physical things, and I know I'm not asking that question very well, but here's what I'm trying to just think about. Comfort is what we generally offer when somebody is in some kind of distress or challenge, or whether it be spiritual or physical. They need that strength that comes from just somebody understanding, right? And trying to be there and provide that general comfort. That might be what's needed in the immediate moment when somebody's in distress, but ultimately, what do they need on the other side of that? The edifying side, right? So I think there's a twofold thing happening here in this text that we need to work on in relationships. It's one thing to be there for somebody when they're challenged, when they're in trouble, when they're facing some hardship or difficulty, and to provide that comfort that they might need in that moment. But the point we should be also stressing is that we should be moving forward from that moment towards actually lifting out of them, help lift them out of whatever it is that's causing the distress or discomfort. And I think that's the part sometimes we miss. We're there for folks, and we weep with them, and we sorrow with them, and we try to provide a level of comfort when they're hurting and life is challenging for them. But if we don't spend any time edifying, then they may never actually move out of that. They might be in that discomfort from kind of a continual basis. So it's important for us to both comfort and edify within these relationships. It's important for us to recognize both sides of that equation.
Maybe it might be hard to understand to comfort yourself. So put it in the reverse form. You've got to be comfortable in your service to God.
Yeah.
You can't be uncomfortable when you're serving God.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Bob. And the more comfortable we become in our service, in our obedience, in our relationship with the Father, we'll get better at helping other people. And we become more in tune to that relationship. It will only help us improve our relationships with others.
Comfort
Sure.
that you would have. It helps them.
Yeah.
You know, hey, there is something better than what I have.
Right. Right. And I think it's an interesting thought, Bob, as my mind's thinking about that a little bit. If people view us as having, for lack of a better word, an awkward relationship with God, one that just doesn't seem to gel well, one that doesn't seem to be very committed, it's kind of going to be hard to say to them, well, you need to turn to God. You need to seek Him. You need to look to Jesus. And then they look at me and go, well, you seem to have kind of a disjointed relationship with God, and we can't be much help if we're not comfortable in that relationship to begin with.
Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. That's the other side, the rejoicing part.
That's right.
That's the lifting up side.
Yeah. Right. And I think you're right, Will. I think that we can find comfort in both of those aspects, right? When we're challenged and somebody's there for me, or when I've got things that are positive going on and people are right there with me, celebrating right alongside of me, that brings benefit and encouragement as well. Here's what Jeff said. He said, iron sharpens iron. A steel blade drawn over and over against a rigid whetstone will only sharpen the serration. In just that way, a well-chosen friend will serve to motivate me to deeper reflection upon things than someone who is dispassionate, unconcerned, or flighty, right? There's purpose. They're purpose-driven behind what they're doing. If they're trying to lift me up or encourage me or help me, but they seem completely disinterested in that, it's not very motivating, is it? It's not very encouraging when they seem to be completely disconnected from what it is that they're trying to help me with, unconcerned really about what's happening going on. An intelligent, spiritual fellow traveler will not let me rest on my laurels, but will stir me up so that I might continue to grow. I'm pausing on that because that struck me when I read that. Because Jeff's right. Those who are genuinely interested in my spiritual growth won't let me just sit idle in my relationship with God. They will challenge me and encourage me and edify and exhort and promote, right? They will want to see me grow. And I think sometimes we might get offended by it, right? We might get offended by the fact, well, they don't think I'm doing enough, or they don't think well, that may not be the case at all. What maybe they see is greater potential in what you can be doing in service to God. What they might be witnessing is greater growth and opportunity that's there in front of you. They're just trying to lead you to see that path. And I think we need to be challenging each other in that sometimes. We so often wait for people to hit rock bottom, and then we try to drag them back up to where they need to be. Well, wouldn't it be a lot easier to just kind of encourage continual growth before they ever hit rock bottom? Never let them hit the bottom, because that's kind of hard, right? That's kind of hard to pull somebody else up from. But if we're working towards edifying and encouraging along the path, then that's a better approach. And I need to grow in that. I need to think about that a little more. I need to probably do a better job in doing that for others and receiving that from others in my life. To appreciate that we shouldn't be just sitting back, reaching a plateau and just becoming content with ourselves and with the growth in others, but to continually push forward so that we don't, in some senses, let people get so despondent and so disinterested because they haven't had any encouragement along the way. That's a real challenge. And that takes some personal connectivity to make happen, by the way. Because here's what I mean by that. The truth is, there's not one of us in this building that could be that for everybody in the building 100% of the time. Right? In other words, it takes more than just one person doing it. And you can't build the kind of connections with 100 people and have the time to be these kinds of things 100% of the time for those folks. And my point is, we need to start building better relationships among our brothers and sisters in Christ, not just solely dependent, and I'll say it because I don't know how any other way to say it, to not be solely dependent on the preacher or just we've got our role, the elders have their role, the preacher's got his role. I can't be that for everybody in this building, right? I can help you along the way, and I can be and I can say things from up there in these Bible classes. I can do various things, but it's hard to build the kind of personal connectivity with the time constraints to be able to be this for everybody. And I only say that not to say poor, pitiful preachers, boy, they have such a rough time. That's not my point. My point is, we need to be building relationships with each other so that we can be this for each other and have more than just one go-to person that we're thinking, well, that's the guy that always has to do that role. No, all of us can be that for each other. And the greater time and energy we put into building the relationships with our brothers and sisters in Christ will build ready-made opportunities to do the things that we're talking about here today. We've got to get out of this mold of coming into these assemblies, spending our couple hours a week in worship and study, then leaving the assemblies disconnected from each other. And then come back into the next assembly and then leave and we're disconnected again until the next one, right? We need to be more than that for each other. And we need to find ways to build these relationships so that we can sharpen one another on a more regular basis. A knife will get dull pretty quick if it doesn't have that regular sharpening that could occur. And that's the imagery that we're looking at here this morning. So he says, to stir me up so that I might continue to grow, to challenge my assumptions. Anybody ever made an assumption? Put your hands up. Just put your hands up. Right? We have all made assumptions about circumstances and situations. We have all assumed that something was either true or that something was being addressed, whatever, right? We've all been guilty of that. Have you ever just assumed somebody was being comforted? Have you ever just assumed, well, they know A, B, and C. They know person A, B, and C. Surely those people are edifying them. Right? And we make assumptions that people are being comforted and edified and being sharpened. And maybe they're not. Maybe they're not being. And maybe I need to be challenged in that sense. I need to be challenged to not just assume. Maybe I need to be challenged about my assumptions about what I know or don't know about the Scriptures. Maybe I need to be challenged to grow in my knowledge and understanding of the grace of God, right? Too often these assumptions are made about my own personal growth and about what's being done for others that sometimes a lot of things just don't happen like they should. And this paragraph just really struck me as I was reading through it in our study. To see things from a nobler perspective than that which first appears. To appreciate things on a greater level than just kind of the superficial approaches that we often have towards various things. Your thoughts. I've given you what I've been thinking about as I was reading through Jeff's material, the things that you may have thought about as you consider those statements. You guys are already all hopped up on Reese cups, I can tell. So what did Peter hope to do in 1 Peter 1:13 and chapter 3 and verse 1? What was he hoping to accomplish? You say it one more time.
Win others by a good example.
Okay. To win and lead others by our positive example. What else did you see? Well, let me share the text with you. First, at least the 1 Peter 1:13 text. He said, "Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind and be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." Here's what I thought he was driving at when he added these texts to the study. I can't sharpen others if I'm not what? If I'm not sharp. As iron sharpens iron, right? Those two things help each other in the process. Gird up the loins of your mind. I got to have my thinking right? I've got to spend some time making sure that my thought processes and the way I'm thinking about things is accurate. Have you ever had too quick of a response to a situation in your life? Put your hands up, right? We've all had that we often call it a knee jerk, right? We just react. We saw it, we heard it, we reacted. When really maybe sometimes the better approach to that moment would have been what? Yeah, to be patient, right? Think about it a little bit. Consider what's really happening in front of me. Think about the situation. How can I best help this moment? What's really needful in this situation, right? That's I think, what Peter's driving at here when he says, gird up the loins of your mind. Get them girded. Get them protected. Get them governed. If we speak before we think, that usually doesn't what? It doesn't go well. It generally doesn't go well. And let's bring it into context of our study. It often can lead me to say something that doesn't fit the need that's in front of me. If I don't think about it, maybe I throw some kind of word of edification when really a word of comfort might have been needed in that moment, right? I just kind of react. Have you ever thought, I won't ask you to raise your hands on this, but I want you to be honest in your own mind. Have you ever looked at somebody else's problems and said, I don't know why they're having a big deal about that? I don't understand. I don't understand why they're challenged by that. I don't understand why that's such a struggle for them. If I was presented with that same scenario, I'd have that resolved in 2 seconds flat. And so what we do, because we don't gird up the loins of our mind, we respond and react to those people and their situations sometimes with words that aren't fitting to what they may actually need in that moment. Now, I guarantee you I've done it, right? I've chosen edifying rather than comfort sometimes. I've probably chosen rebuke when exhort was needed. I've probably chosen reprove when rebuke was needed, right? I guarantee you that in my 54 years of life, there have been many a time where I failed. I just didn't process the situation as well as I should have, and I didn't choose the right things to say. But I can tell you this also, over that 54 years, that the moments where I spend a little more time thinking about what I should say and what's really happening in front of me, I generally do a better job than the moments where I just react. Iron can sharpen iron, but iron can also do what? Yeah, it can also destroy. It can also destroy. That same sword that I'm wielding, that same iron that I might be wielding, might be able to sharpen. But on the other side of that, it can also create greater problems and difficulties. Gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober, right? Take what's in front of you seriously before you respond. Think about it. Think about the grace of God when you're trying to decide how I should react and what's going to really be beneficial and what may not be beneficial in this situation. I think all of those kinds of things are important in this process.
Gird up the loins of your mind. That is a defensive statement to make. You're fortifying your mind.
Yeah.
And you're going to have trials. But God gave His Son Jesus so that we would receive the good things in life. In His Word. So if you fortify your mind, you're keeping the harm, the sin away from you, and keeping you faithful to God.
The greatest source of iron that sharpens me as iron is the testimony of God's Word, and a willingness to be prepared to accept whatever sharpening comes from God needs to be a willing part of me, to embrace whatever it is God is trying to sharpen me in, and I think that is important in this process.
Sober brings to the mind the idea of being sharpened, being disciplined, and alert.
Yeah. And that discipline and alert helps me know then when others have need and when I can go and be of help.
Gird up our loins in the battle for Christ too.
Yeah.
That means to be ready. So, preparation ahead of time for any situation like this.
Right. If our mind isn't protected, girded, prepared ahead of time, it's kind of hard to behave right. And I think that's an important part of this process, right? That kind of that growth process that we have helps me appreciate more about how I need to be ready for the moment before it happens, or I tend to just react and create the problems that we're talking about.
Discipline comes in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 1 John, or rather not 1 John, but in John 15, I should say, so what act shows the greater love for our friends in John 15? There's a specific verse there, by the way, I was pushing you towards in that reading.
To lay down his life for a friend.
That's correct. That's verse 13, right? Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Now, there's a greater implication here, right? Because Jesus uses this illustration, greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for his friends. And Jesus laid down his life for whom? Yeah, his enemies in some senses, right? Because everybody was his enemy because of sin. Everybody had sin. And because of sin, there's enmity between us and God. And so Jesus lays his life down even for his enemies. But in context, greater love hath no man to lay down his life for his friends. And if that is elevated as something that is important, then imagine when he sacrifices himself for the benefit of mankind. Now, you've heard me mention this before, but it's worth reminding. That's an extreme example to show us the ultimate, right? I should be willing to lay down my life for my friends. If that's the extreme end of this, then I probably ought to be willing to sacrifice a whole lot of other smaller things in between that point, right? We might say, well, yeah, sure, if I had an opportunity or needed to give my life for somebody else's and one of my friends, I'd do that in a heartbeat. Well, the truth is, most of us aren't going to have to do that, right? We're not going to be put in situations where we have to make that ultimate sacrifice of our life for the benefit of another. But there's a whole host of other things short of giving my physical life up that I can sacrifice and that I can make do the things that would encourage and help, and may even at times have to put myself aside and esteem others better than self and make those sacrifices on behalf of others. If we're going to really sharpen and encourage and uplift and build each other up in the faith, then there are going to have to be times where I say, I have to decrease so that I can help them increase. I have to put aside my own opinions maybe at times. I may have to put aside what my own desires and likes are. I may have to put aside my own interests in certain things so that I can actually be of benefit to help and uplift somebody else. I think a lot of times we're willing to help all day long so long as I don't have to give anything up, right? I'm willing to be as helpful as anybody so long as I always get to keep my preferences and what I like and what I want. And so long as I can maintain those things, I'll make all kinds of gestures of help towards others. But sometimes it's more than just what's comfortable to me to offer, but requires me to be willing to actually make sacrifice on behalf of others to help benefit and strengthen them. And that's the harder part sometimes. We do all kinds of good things that don't necessarily require a lot of sacrifice on our part. But what do I do when that need arises, when real sacrifice needs to be made in order to help somebody else? That's the real challenge for all of us.
And then try a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a little more to that thought there. He didn't ask them to lay down their lives for him. He said, just obey my commandments. Just do what I ask you to do.
Yeah. Right. Here's the extreme, and what I'm actually asking of you is just be obedient to my will at whatever cost, but follow me, right? And make that ultimate sacrifice. And in so doing, then we'll do all these other things that we've been talking about this morning. So, what does the Hebrew writer say is important in the process of encouraging one another in Hebrews 10, 24 and 25? What's he say there?
Love and good works.
Yeah. To stir up one another unto love and good works. Here's the text. Let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Now, there's a whole host of things you could talk about out of that text. You've heard, about a month or so ago, I spent 15 or 20 minutes in a sermon talking about Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. But what I want us to simply appreciate this morning is it's awful hard to edify and uplift and encourage other people if I'm never what? If we're never together, right? If we're never spending any time connected to each other, it's kind of hard to do any of these things we've been talking about this morning. It's kind of hard to be that help and encouragement to others if I'm not present. So when we assemble, who's the primary focus? I'm kind of giving it to you, by the way. God, right? God is the primary focus. God and His Son, right? They are the primary focus of worship. And we should never enter into any worship where they are not, right? That worship would be in vain if they are not the primary focus of that purpose of gathering. But what's gained by that is not just, okay, we've honored the first phase, which is vital and necessary, but then we edify those who have also gathered to honor and worship God. Here's my point as we're quickly running out of time this morning. I need you, and you need me. You can't have this kind of edification here in Hebrews 10, 24 and 25 if we don't bring that benefit to each other. We need each other to fulfill Hebrews 10, 24, 25. And you've heard me say, sometimes we kind of relegate this verse to the negative conversation of don't miss church. Well, that's an important thought process, but there's more here than that, right? There's a deeper meaning here in that. Not just the negative side, well, you better not miss. No, we need to be here because we need each other. We need each other. We need to provoke unto love and good works. We need to encourage one another and lift each other up. And we can't do that without connectivity. And so he told that audience of folks, when you see the difficult days arising, and you heard me a while back talk to you a little bit about, more and more I think about that, I see more and more that 70 AD moment when destruction's coming to Jerusalem of that Hebrew audience. And when you see that day coming, don't neglect coming together and encouraging one another. You're going to need it. You're going to need it. But it's important in sharpening one another to actually spend time together. And it was kind of hard for them to provoke each other unto love and good works if they didn't spend much time together. Was Paul being unfriendly towards Peter in Galatians 2, verse 11? No. Peter had a problem. Paul addressed it. And he led him to appreciate that even face to face. I appreciate all the comments and your thoughts this morning. We'll take 7 or 8 minutes here and take a short break, and then we'll enter into our period of worship.